Hello and welcome back to a new episode in the Shut Up David series. Thank you for watching. My name is David Wallach, Principal Coach here at NewView Safety Coach. Today we've got a very special guest for you again. You've been spoiled with all these guests. Our guest today is Brett Reed, a global expert on safety leadership and developing high-performance teams. With over 20 years of consulting and coaching experience, Brett has pioneered new research-based approaches that have enabled clients to achieve executive years of injury-free operations. Brett's unique background includes leadership roles in the Australian SAS, where he served as a major and freefall troop commander, as well as operational and business management roles in multinational companies. He's the creator of the 4D safety system and software that drives measurable safety performance improvement. An author and frequent speaker on safety leadership topics, Brett has an unparalleled understanding of risk, human factors, and what it takes to lead safely in high-risk environments. Experience honed through an adventurous career, including skydiving instruction, wreck diving, and previously competing in motorsports. So let me bring him to the stage now and welcome Mr. Brett Reed. Hello, Mr. Brett Reed.
Hello, David. Thank you for
having me.
Sir? Yeah, I'm great. Thank you.
Good
Looking
stuff.
Forward
Good
to
stuff.
this. Looking forward to this discussion. Yeah.
It's been a while, hasn't it? Just to fill the listeners in, this is I think this is my 7th or 8th interview or something on those lines. And when I was planning on doing these interviews for the YouTube channel, I spoke to Brett about this, because Brett and I have known each other for 3-4 years now.
Yeah.
Brett was actually the first ever guest that I had at the Safety Differently Book Club here in Perth, and he came to talk about his book, along with Rod Ritchie that was there as well, and a couple of other people. And it's kind of grown since then, but yeah, he was the first guest. So I thought, well, wouldn't it be nice if for that particular adventure we had, Brett was the first guest for the Safety Differently Book Club, we could get him on as the first guest for this, for the interview section of the YouTube channel for the Shut Up David series. And I reached out to Brett and he said, sounds like a great idea. Let's do it. And we had it all teed up and all lined up, but the stars didn't end up aligning in our favor, and Brett had to go away and do some work, and I wanted to get things going. So we've had other people on in the meantime, but welcome, sir. And thank you again for agreeing to be on here. How are we?
Thank you. Yeah, very good. Loving this this weather in Perth at the moment. It's a bit of a relief to not have the 40-something degree days.
It is, isn't it? It is. I was just talking to a friend about that this morning. This, autumn's probably the best time of year in Perth, isn't it?
Yeah, I always love this period from really the start of April, end of March, start of April through to May, and it's just beautiful.
It is.
And especially if you're someone who likes boating or things on the water, the sea breeze has died off and you don't get the big ocean chop, and it's lovely just being, whether it's canoeing on the river or boating, heading over to Rottnest. Lovely.
It's nice not getting into your car in the morning at like 6:30, 7 o'clock, and it being 30 odd degrees already at like 7 in the morning, because it's just not cooled down overnight. It's just crazy stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Anywho, so why don't we let people know what we're going to be talking about today? A little bit of an overview, a bit of the value that you can bring to them, and why they should listen to this talk, really, and what we're going to talk about. So we've obviously spoke previously, had a few conversations about what might be of value to people, and there's a few topics we want to touch on. We want to touch on your book. We want to touch on some of the research that you've done. We want to touch on your experience of managing risk throughout your varied career, and the common tie, which ties all that together, is that human element, and that human element comes in the form of coaching for leaders throughout the organization. So that's a bit of an overview for people listening as to what we're going to be covering in this piece. So why don't you give us a bit of a brief overview, Brett, in relation to why you created the book in the first place?
Yeah, thanks, David. The book came about with Rod Ritchie and myself as we were working on for a couple of different clients, a couple of different engagements, one of them being a very big engagement with Coal Seam Gas in Queensland. in northeastern Australia, and we were doing a lot of team startups, so rig startups for drilling rigs working in coal seam gas. And what we'd always seen with projects in general was that the traditional thinking in project management focuses on what we call 3 dimensions, and they're the objective things, the systems things, and systemic things that managers focus on to create a new project and thinking that's going to create performance. But we continually saw a gap, and that's what we addressed through the team startups. And what we saw was that performance increased dramatically, and that performance, including a reduction in safety incidents and improvement in safety performance, that increased dramatically when you got people aligned and really brought people into the overall performance equation. The issue was that traditional safety hasn't set people up well to understand what those performance factors are. So, when we were teaching these to leaders that were starting up teams and getting them to focus on those, as I said, we found that significant improvement. So we thought we'd put it into a book, which is you've got up there on the screen, David, Safety Performance Reimagined. It's our take on the leadership factors that drive just sustainable safety performance. So
yeah, right. And the subtitle there is a 4D approach to organizational performance.
Yeah, and the 4 dimensions are what I was talking about. That the logo on the cover of the book is the green and the red and the amber cubes, which represent the 3-dimensional approach to safety. And the 4th dimension in that model, if you look at that, if you think of or view that as 3 cubes, you'll see the 4th dimension as a void that sits in the center. And that void is the leadership and focus on people and the culture that leaders create in a high-performing organization.
So these three elements here being disjointed, only mildly connected at the periphery, but they're missing that joining element in the middle, which you're putting forward here is the leadership, the communications, the culture, how people interact, the people, basically the person at center.
The non-technical skills that people bring to their organization. Yeah. So the ability to build relationships, the ability to earn trust. And notice I talk about building relationships, but I don't talk about building trust. We need to understand that leaders earn trust. They can't build it. The concept of building trust suggests that leaders control it. Whereas one of the things that we've recognized very significantly with teams is that it's the teams that need to trust their leaders. Leaders need to be able to earn that trust of their people and their teams.
Yeah. So, okay.
And this is what leads us into the area that we're going to talk about with coaching. That, as I said, traditional safety and the conventional management approach, doesn't set leaders up well to understand those significant factors, such as you need to earn trust, you need to build relationships. Without trust, you won't have any meaningful dialogue, and then therefore you won't have shared meaning within your teams. These are the areas that we have we really just codified through the book, and we've developed a coaching program in conjunction with the Australian Institute of Professional Coaches, which focuses on that 4-dimensional performance approach to organizational performance. So safety is just a factor. We tend to see it as of primal importance, and it's a principal point of performance, in that what we say is if you can't, as a leader, if you can't get people to perform safely, and understand how they can look after their own safety while they're performing in the organization. Good luck trying to get them interested in quality or cost controls, performance, production, any of those other measures of performance.
Yeah, right. I like that term you use there, codify, because this isn't, obviously I have the book as well, and it's not, I don't mean it's in a bad way. It's not reinventing anything. It's taking science and knowledge that was already there. You'd use elements of disk profile. You use the integral model as well. You use known organizational tools that already exist, and you're right. You codify them. You put them in the context of safety improvement in an organizational sense. So it's nothing. It's it's not a brand new thing for people to jump onto. These are well-known models and frameworks you're using. They've just been repurposed, I suppose, for this particular need, haven't they?
Yeah, thank you. It's and I'm very quick to acknowledge that we are not. It's not about reinventing the wheel, and we haven't come up with any great creative insights. You look at the four-dimensional approach. That is standard project management. Basically, if you look at any new project, especially in the resources industry, oil and gas, mining, it starts with exploration. They find a resource that they think is worth developing. The first thing they do, in fact, David, can you put up the four-dimensional performance model? Because it might be easier if I can talk about that. So if you look at the green cube there, yeah, thank you. Look at the green cube. The first thing you do with a resource when the geologist finds something, you look at, well, what can we produce from that? What's the quantity there that's in that reserve, and how are we going to produce it, and over what's the schedule for that? So from the very start, you set some production targets and put a time frame to it. Yep. And out of that, you identify the costs and the resources for the project in project terms. That tends to go through that cycle, through the process, and there's a toll gating process where you eventually get to final investment decision. This is the amount of money that it's going to cost and the resources required to develop this project and develop this resource. And then the third quadrant, the amber quadrant there is, and what are the systems and processes that we need to make all of this function and make it work together? So it's very standard project management, and the same, it's management in general. This is how we tend to manage. The unfortunate thing is traditional safety and conventional safety has just gone down this path of leaning on that knowledge and applying that approach and ignoring the center of that logo, the center of that model, which is the leadership and culture.
Yeah. No, that's great. Thank you for elaborating on that. You also use, from memory, you use the integral model as well, don't you, in your approach in order to be able to codify? And I'm coming back to the word codify again because I have heard it before, obviously, but I like it because it helps. Instead of just saying, oh, this part of your organization needs to have a better culture, or that needs to be this, or this needs to be that. The integral model actually helps you identify every element within the organization, so you can, and anyone can do it. It's not just the consultant, or the specialist you bring in. It's there for everyone to use and go, okay, I can identify that these are the aspects of our organization given this particular model and framework, which has been used for the past, I can't remember, I think it's 50, 60 years now.
Yeah.
And then you can say, okay, we can identify them, and then we know that if we change one aspect, it's likely to affect these other aspects in different parts of the organization. So how do we manage that morass of different elements? But that helps you codify it, doesn't it, from the beginning?
Yeah, absolutely. Ken Wilber first started talking about integral consciousness in the very late 70s, and in the 90s he did a lot of work in that area of what he referred to as integral consciousness within societies and cultures. And then it's increasingly made its way into management. I was working with UWA and Professor Ron Cassiope in the late 90s, and he was a big fan of the integral model. So I was working a lot with it then. What we did, though, when we started working with it in the area of management and safety, we recognized that the way Ken Wilber developed it was the opposite or the reverse to the way we think of it now. So in our model, the subjective side of the integral model sits on the right, the way Ken Wilber talks about it. So he talks about culture and a consciousness that develops within communities, integral consciousness, and that sits on the left on his model. So we've simply swapped it over so it aligns more with left brain and right brain theory. So the behavior and the systems that we use in our integral model are left brain factors. They sit on the left of the model. Behavior being at that individual level, and systems being the observation of groups working. They work through systems. And the right side of the model is the intentions and at the individual level, and the shared aspirations and perceptions as the subjective side of the group level. So it aligns really well with the four-dimensional performance model, because the first three dimensions sit on the left. They're the objective things that we do. They're systemic, typically. They're linear in their nature. They can be measured. Whereas the fourth dimension, which is about people and leadership and culture, are all subjective things.
Yeah, and they would all sit on the right-hand side of your model, but this diagram here illustrates the void, which is the lack of those things, that element which is tying everything together and having such an impact on literally every facet of the organization.
And the way we like to describe it and think of it is that if you can get the fourth dimension working, instead of having three areas of performance, three dimensions represented by those colored cubes, which are tenuously linked at the corners, as you mentioned before, with the void in the center, you can reverse that model in your mind and your thinking. Not everyone can do this. Some people look at it easily, and they can look through those three cubes and see an opaque cube behind that the three colored ones are all stuck to, basically, and that's the fourth dimension.
I can see it, but I have to work at it. I have to really pull my focus and then relax, and then it appears. And the opaque one in the middle is obviously multicolored, because it takes a side from the three of the others. But then, well, for me anyway, the others kind of fall back, and then that one becomes a centerpiece, almost like the corner of a cornicing, from the ceiling that goes around. It stands out as the the dominant element in my mind. Anyway.
Well, and if you can perceive it that way, it works brilliantly, because if you go back to basic organizational theory, every single company that's out there started as an idea in somebody's head. It didn't start as a set of systems and processes and resources.
And profit and loss sheets and things like that.
Yeah, all of those things get developed after a single person or a group of people. You look at Microsoft, being started by Gates and his co-developers of Microsoft.
Wozniak, wasn't it?
Wozniak, Steve Wozniak, and it was started in a garage. And so many businesses get started as an idea in very humble settings, and then they grow from that. And the three dimensions that you see, that you can see clearly in this model, all get developed, and that's what the outside world sees. But sitting behind that is a group of entrepreneurs, innovators, and that's represented by that cube in the center that actually, when you view the model this way, it sits behind. You can't directly see it, you can't directly touch it and feel it, you have to perceive it. That's the nature of four-dimensional performance. So we have tried to capture that through the book to help organizations understand what we perceived as being a huge gap. And if you only have to look at the history of major accident events, and you look at BP Texas City, which happened in March of 2005, BP Macondo, which was June of 2005 was Texas City, March of 2010 was Macondo, and any major accident event you look at, the sources of those events tend to be that disconnect between the three dimensions and the fourth dimension, bringing those things together properly, effectively.
And that scale, I mean, I know we've talked about those large major events there, but this isn't just for large, major organizations, high risk, is it? This is for any organization which will have to have these three elements and will have to employ people. That's the beauty of this. I think it's entirely scalable, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. The origin for us came out of researching major accident events and looking at the failings in major accident events. But it absolutely, as you say, David, it applies to every team and every organization that's creating performance. I mean, performance starts at the frontline level, connecting with your clients. We're working with an aviation company at the moment, and it's very clear in that company that, let me just say, they've been going from strength to strength to strength in performance over the last 12 months. And it was a high-performing organization already, but they've continued to improve. And the philosophy that's been driving that is that the people that create the outcome for their clients are their pilots flying the aircraft and the engineers that keep them in the air, that keep them airworthy and serviceable and reliable, and the pilots through their skills and the application of their systems that fly these aircraft very safely and consistently. So it's those frontline people that create the performance, and the senior leaders and the executive team recognize that 100%. They see their job as making sure that these three dimensions that we show here, that those three dimensions are working effectively, and that the things that need to be developed there are developed, and then they're done right. So, and this is an area where it ties in really, what we talk about ties in really well with Safety Differently, and the new view, the Safety Differently view within the new view of safety, that Sidney Dekker has always talked about things being done right and things being done well. We say that the first three dimensions you need to do right, because they're linear and they're algorithmic and they're binary. You can talk about systems that work or don't work, budgets are sufficient or not sufficient. And yes, you can tweak budgets and you can save money, but at some point you cut too deeply where things don't work, and there is a measure. You can apply measures around it's right or wrong. Whereas the fourth dimension, the subjective dimension, is about people, and it's not appropriate to say it's right or wrong. We talk about people being leadership being done well, and relationships being done well. Leaders building effective relationships with their teams and the workplace, such that things go well. So it's that fundamental difference between do the things that we need to do right, and then the other parts of it, the subjective things, we just need to ensure that they are done well and that they go well.
Yeah, it's treating different parts of your system differently. The things that can be treated mechanically, algorithmically, a bit like I said, binary, do it well, but then don't try and treat your people the same way. That needs a whole new set of skill sets in order to be able to get, to get the trust, to get the feedback you need, to get the engagement, to get the commitment, to get the creativity, all those other things which the organization needs. They need to be, I'm going to say managed differently, but we know if the word is led. They need to have good leadership there as well. Is this a good time to bring up the 6 factors?
Yeah. If you want to just show that model, that all the things we're talking about in the 4 dimensions have really, what's evolved so that we now recognize performance as having 6 distinct factors that need to be built upon. So the interesting thing with the 4 dimensions is that they get developed over time, and that they're a framework and they get built in layers. Whereas these 6 factors we tend to see as stepping stones, that it starts at the very bottom here with trust, that if you're not able as a leader to build trust with your people, then when you go to site, when you go to the operational areas within your business and you ask people, how's it going, and ask for feedback, you see that with leaders who are not trusted, that no one wants to talk to them. No one will tell them how it truly is.
Yep.
And I think there's many good examples of that. There was great examples within BP in that period through the first decade of this century, from 2000 to 2010, where the senior leaders just had no idea of how things truly were, and they weren't listening to the feedback that they were being given. They continued to reject it, and I think a current example of that is Boeing. And what's happening with Boeing? They're going down that same path where you have senior leaders, and then in Boeing, it's pretty much senior leaders. They would have been given a lot of feedback from people that have. You only have to Google and have a look on YouTube videos of Boeing and their woes, and you'll see that there's many mid-level managers that have been labeled as whistleblowers, but they've come out publicly talking about their concerns, the concerns they've had for 5 years or more in Boeing, and the feedback that they've given to the senior leadership team, the executive team in Boeing, and it just hasn't been listened to. In fact, in a lot of cases, they've been punished for speaking out. And yeah. So
this gets
the examples continue on.
This kind of and this, as you were talking then, it reminded me again of, although the 4th dimension is the missing leadership culture and all that kind of stuff, the systems that are there actively shape that culture as well. So if we take that example you just gave of Boeing, you and I'm going to speculate here. I don't want to get sued by anybody or anything along those lines, but I'm speculating that a lot of the incentives, a lot of the systems that were set up for motivating the leadership towards profit, towards production, towards getting out the door quickly, towards being number one, and that was the system impact on the leaders. And that was then driving the leaders' behavior, which was then affecting the culture, which is then, filtering down throughout the entire organization. So there is that, again, even when you slot in that 4th dimension of leadership, it's integrated with every aspect of every part of the organization, isn't it? Because they all operate as one in a way. Am I fair in saying that?
And very much so. And the great thing with Boeing, similar to if you go back and look at BP with their history of Texas City, we don't need to speculate, and we're not making wild accusations. These are facts that have been investigated and reported on. In Boeing's case, it was the US Chemical Safety Board report, in BP's case in 2005 with Texas City, the US Chemical Safety Board's report, which was a groundbreaking investigation where they really brought in the impact of a flawed culture on performance and a flawed leadership culture and an overly zealous focus on management of costs and cost reduction and pursuit of production, and the impact that had on the Texas City refinery, and the path that created that ended up in that explosion at the refinery. So that was investigated. We don't have to make assumptions there. Those facts are very well established. Just last month in February, the Federal Aviation Authority has released an expert panel report for Boeing. Have you seen that at all?
No.
You would have had a, oh, okay. It's just come out. It's very detailed, and it highlights the several fundamental problems within Boeing that contributed to the crash of the problems related to the 737 MAX, and continue right through to the door issue with the Alaskan Airlines 737. So those facts are now out there. We can read those and understand them for what they are. What we see within Boeing is, according to the investigation, that all of the bonuses, the focus, or the remuneration and the focus was on production and how it directly linked to shareholder value or the share price within the company. And the view was that they're creating shareholder value when they're driving the share price up.
Yeah. And then what happens is you don't end up doing those three quadrants adequately enough. Yeah. And then to link in the beginning of your talk about this, those three, production, the scheduling, they all have to be done well, and they all have to be done, to the standard that's needed first, and then you can start really looking at, developing the culture of the organization. And that looks like what's happened is they've started tweaking those three sections, haven't they?
Well, and what they've really done in what BP was doing at the time, and to BP's credit, under Bob Dudley, the CEO that took over from Tony Hayward in 2010, under Bob Dudley, they turned around the culture of that organization. And what BP had been doing was ignoring the bottom three factors in our 6 factors model here. They didn't have the trust of their workforce in a lot of cases. Now and in the book, I do acknowledge that in fact, the senior executive, who's now a non-executive director, a number of companies, Bruce Webb, wrote the foreword in our book. Now, he was a very senior executive within BP over that period, and he was the COO of their operations in Africa, I should say, not just North Africa. And I know BP in Australia was running very safe operations. But so BP was not just one organization, very large and diverse organization, but certainly in the US, they went down a path that didn't lead to good outcomes, and they had catastrophe after catastrophe, and you can track the differences within those. But what they effectively did in refining, the GM that was running refining, you can see he was deposed. So interviewed by the courts and his deposition taken in the Texas City investigation. And they were basically oblivious to these first three dimensions. They didn't have the trust. They were getting dialogue through different sources. They were getting feedback from the front line about the concerns that people had in the refinery, and people saying that this place is set up for a catastrophic failure, and no action was taken on that. So there was no shared meaning and no common purpose. But what we see with a lot of managers who simply believe that they can manage their way to performance, they feel they can ignore the virtually the first four factors. They don't have the commitment of people to a common purpose, but they feel that they can hold them accountable through various processes, basically, and that they'll get the performance that they're after. And that's true. I'm
going to be a bit of a devil's advocate here, Brett. Is it because they don't want to do it, or because they're not aware of these other factors?
I've seen both, and I think we need to be cautious not to label people or to put people into to pigeonhole senior leaders. I mean, there are some leaders who simply have not been, they've not had the development and not had good role models to work for. So they have had 10 or 20 years of development where they think that this is the way that you do things. You set stretch targets, you measure people with all kinds of rigorous key performance indicators, KPIs, typically focused on the world of the three dimensions, the management side of things, and you beat people up when they don't achieve them. You hold them accountable in a negative way. And one of the things we talk about with leadership is that most leaders don't understand. If you ask them, how do you influence people, they don't understand that there's fundamentally only two ways to motivate and influence people. The first is the ideal way you do that, and that's by inspiring them. But the second way is by manipulating them and coercing them and bullying them into submission or into alignment and compliance. And it's really interesting that you look at the conventional approach to safety and the whole zero harm approach to safety. The word that you see come up time and time again is compliance. They measure compliance with systems, and they measure compliance with the outcomes that they're expecting. Are we complying with these processes? Are we conforming? Are we achieving these targets that we set? And we see that as falling into that latter area of manipulation and coercion and bullying people, as opposed to truly inspiring people and creating a group of people who are committed to a common purpose.
But to your point as well, and I want to make this link to your point, compliance has to be in place for the first three sections. It just can't be used for that fourth section of managing people. Exactly.
And let me make the distinction. Here's how I explain it in the aviation world. As I said, we're working with an aviation company now, and I've done a lot of being in special forces and especially being in the world of free fall and aircraft operations, all kinds of roping and abseiling from helicopters, descending from helicopters. As I said, I've spent a lot of time in aircraft, and including exiting out of a Iroquois helicopter that had a major malfunction, and the 8 freefallers who were on board all bailed out, and the 3 crew crash landed that aircraft. And so luckily they all walked away from it. But so I've had my share of aviation mishaps. I understand it, but I talk about, and this is the world socio-technical safety and socio-technical systems and socio-technical performance. You have to get the technology that you're working with right. If you don't, then no amount of good leadership or commitment or committed people will be able to create the performance you want. So the way I put that is that no amount of good piloting is going to save the pilot and the crew on board if the wings fall off the aircraft. The pilot can't land the aircraft with no wing.
Could be the best leader in the world, but he's not going to save that plane.
Exactly. But I lived up in the highlands of New Guinea for 2 years and did a lot of flying up there in helicopters and fixed wing aircraft. And I knew a pilot who I used to charter the aircraft that he was flying for a not-for-profit charter airline up there, and he crashed a Cessna 210 into a mountain, and with his family on board, unfortunately, and they all died. So, and that's the flip side of it. So no amount of good piloting will save you if the wings fall off the aircraft, but there have been plenty of pilots who have flown perfectly good aircraft into the ground or into a mountain. Yep. So both are important, and that's the socio-technical nature of performance. We have to get the technology right, and in the new view of safety, that's typically expressed as we create the capacity for our systems to perform as expected and fail safely when the unexpected happens, which we're all familiar with. And then we have to build the technical capacity of our people. Pilots need to be able to fly right and fly their aircraft, to a highly competent standard. But then the non-technical skills, where they observe the rules and fly in accordance with the operating procedures, and have the right risk orientation, the right relationship to risk, and are committed to doing the things that they need to do correctly. What we call the non-technical skills that they bring to performance as well. Yeah,
and you touched on it briefly towards the beginning and the middle as well, Brett. Your involvement with AIPC, Australian Institute of Professional Coaching. Do we need this diagram for you to talk about that? And did you want to relate it to this diagram here?
Yeah, I certainly can, David. Thank you.
Yeah.
So I've partnered with Australian Institute, or my company, Safety Leaders Group and 4Dimensional Performance have partnered with the Australian Institute of Professional Coaches to create a coaching qualification to help people who want to move on or develop a skill set past just the first three dimensions of safety. What we see, and this course was developed by Rod Ritchie and myself, and then in partnership with Dr. Suzanne Knowles, who's the founder of AIPC. So we developed this coaching course, which has two parts. So there's the first qualification is for operational leaders, departmental heads, and people below them around 4-dimensional performance. And then the second qualification is in executive coaching. So the sort of things I was just talking about now with BP or Boeing, to ensure that the senior executives understand that the gaps they're creating when they don't address the first three factors here. They don't create the level of trust required. There's no shared meaning, and therefore there's no common purpose. And it's so easy. If you have a look at the points that are raised with Boeing, you can see where those factors are missing. And especially when you look at the new, it's not so new now, but the facility that they set up in North Carolina, there was a lot of experienced Boeing people that were expressing concerns about the gaps that existed in that facility and the gaps in technical competency of the people that was allowing the problems that they've had coming out of that facility have been huge. So and again, they're documented through the FAA investigations into the 737 MAX crashes and this latest FAA investigation. So helping senior executives understand, come back to what I was saying before, senior executives' role is to make sure that the first three dimensions are set up such that things will be done right, that they provide the right systems and resources for the frontline people to perform the job that's needed by their clients.
Gotcha.
If they do that well, then when they go to the field, their purpose should be, you see so many of these senior executives that go to the field, what do they want to do? They want to hold a town hall meeting and talk at their people around, this is what we're doing, this is where the company's going, this is our strategy, blah, blah, blah. And most of the people in that room are listening very skeptically because they know that they're being sold a pup in a lot of cases. They're being given the party line, as opposed to senior executives who go to site and spend their time walking around and saying, asking questions of the frontline people. How are we going in terms of the targets and the schedule and production targets that we're setting and that we're expecting of you, or we've, ideally we've agreed on? Are you finding that they are achievable? How is that working? And going through each of the dimensions. How are we going on budgets, and do you have the right tools and equipment and resources that you need to do the job that you're wanting to do, that you're committed to?
And if not, why not? What can I do to help?
And yeah, exactly. So if not, why not? What do you need? And tell me what you think. What would, if you had the opportunity, what would you change? And then asking questions like, so what's stopping us doing that? Or do you think we could do that? What would you need from me to be able to do that? And then senior leaders making an honest commitment, having an honest intent to say, okay, let's do that then. If I can make this happen, can you do your side of it? Now we're starting to get some real dialogue, shared meaning, leading to that third factor of a common purpose. And asking questions like, if I can do this, can you commit to doing the things that you've just said that you believe we can do, we can change? Can you commit to those? Absolutely, I can. Not a problem, boss.
So you see these bottom three components: trust, dialogue, shared meaning, and common purpose. You see those, well, maybe even parts of commitment as well. You see those obviously as being important. They're the bedrock of the organization in the sense that we're talking about. And you see coaching as being a major enabler of those factors.
And it's easy to realize and to think through it if you think of people that have been brought up in a management world, a conventional safety one world, where these things have never been the way we worked, the way we did things, how we lead, and the importance of leadership. Having a whole bunch of safety people run around playing cop, and COP in our book, it's an acronym for control and order and prescribe, and that's what they do. They set up a whole bunch of controls, they order people around, and they prescribe how they're to work. And that leads to the problems that we all see: work as imagined and work as done. So if they stop doing that and start really working on building trust, creating shared dialogue. I mean, when you have a level of trust, you can have a level of intimacy and authenticity with people that the dialogue completely changes. So, but unfortunately, most people have not grown up in that world. So coaching is a perfect entree into building those skills. Without it, people are left to imagine what that might look like.
Yeah. And while you're talking, what's coming to mind is coaching is a very misused term in my understanding, in my experience. It's also at the moment anyway an unregulated industry. I mean, there are professional bodies and agencies. I'm going to be speaking to the ICF and other organizations as well that are trying to provide some regulation and some governance around how people become qualified and keeping standards up and all that kind of stuff. How would you go about if you were a leader of an organization? What would you be looking for if you thought, okay, well, I understand what Brett's talking about here. I understand that we need to do this. I understand that it's important. I understand the impact it's going to have. Where do I start looking? What do I want to start who do I want to start talking to in order to be able to make sure I get someone who isn't just a coach, but is cognizant of this dynamic that I'm trying to achieve?
Yeah. That's the $64,000 question, isn't it, David? And it's a great question, and it needs a well thought out answer, because the reality is that there are way too many people there that go and hang up their shingle as I'm a coach, and they haven't been formally trained. They don't have qualifications, and that's one of the reasons why we wanted to partner with AIPC, because they are also affiliated with the International Coaching Federation, ICF, as you mentioned. So AIPC have they've got several coaching qualifications, and with as you develop those skills and with the right level of demonstration of performance, you can earn ICF accreditation as well. So organizations should certainly look for accredited coaches. I firmly believe that, because if you don't, you end up with the situations that we have now. I mean, how many? Let's play a little bit of a game here. How many things can we think of that have been brought into the world of safety over the last 2 to 3 decades that are now increasingly being questioned and being shown to have really created zero positive effect, and in a lot of cases created a significant negative effect? And that,
well, the main one that springs to my mind is, and this is a controversial topic as well, is the Manslaughter Act. That's
threatening people with huge consequences if you don't comply. If you're found to not be in compliance, and again, it's back to that model of compliance versus commitment. If investigators can find that there's a gap in your compliance, you could be liable under industrial manslaughter legislation, under the laws, and you'll go to court, you'll go to jail, you can't insure yourself against those losses, so you're going to lose your house, all of this punishment. All they've really done is move that punishment from behavioral-based safety, punishment of the worker, to punishment of the executive. It's still a punishment model. So great example. One that I would throw in there is safety moments. So again, someone who hasn't understood the 6 factors and how you need to build trust, and we do that. There's a great formula that we use with that. There's a few different formulas or ways of thinking about trust. There's one I particularly like. It's not ours. It's mentioned in a number of different texts. One is a book called The Trusted Advisor, and the framework is that trust is built by leaders having 3 things: credibility, reliability. So credible. When they speak about a topic, are they credible? Do they know what they're talking about? Are they basing that on proven facts and research and knowledge versus conjecture and assumptions and just imagining whatever they can imagine? credible, reliable? Do they do what they say? Are they good for their word? Can I trust them on their word for their word? And the third point is authenticity / intimacy. Are they
And that's the
authentic?
most important one, isn't it? That's the most
Absolutely.
important one out of the equation. That you could fail to a degree in the first two, and as long as your
You can
authenticity
rely
is
on your
high,
team for the first two.
yeah,
You can't rely on your team for the third one.
that's probably why. Yeah, and it
You
doesn't
have to
take much, like we said. I think Rod Ritchie mentioned the proverb as well, and I think he might have touched on it earlier. You know, trust arrives on foot and leaves on horseback.
Yeah.
Long time to earn it, but it's in a heartbeat you can lose it.
And the fourth factor, so the first three are all above the line. If you think of it as an equation, the below the line factor is self-orientation. And that's the one especially that has it leaving on horseback. If you as a leader show that the moment things get potentially harmful for you or not going to be ideal for you, you will throw your people under the bus to make sure that you come out of it looking all right, then they will never trust you again.
Yeah.
And the example I use there is leaders who, and I've worked for a great leader in Special Forces, CO of the regiment, who, and he was CO of the SAS regiment when the Black Hawk tragedy happened, where 18 soldiers died in a mid-air collision between two helicopters up in North Queensland doing a counter-terrorist training exercise. I was doing part-time work in the regiment then. I was already out working for myself, but I was going back doing project work because I had skills that they could use. When that incident happened in June of 1996, and so the CO of the regiment at the time was a great leader, and he basically he was a role model for that whole approach. That when there was good achievements happen, if the boss would come down and want to acknowledge performance, he'd say, "Well, you know, don't tell me, don't pat me on the back. Talk to these guys. They're the ones that do it. You know, they're the ones that have delivered. It's my team, my people."
That reminds me of Simon Sinek's book, "Leaders Eat Last."
Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
it's
it's a military standard, and in fact, I love Simon Sinek's material. But interesting, having come through the world of Special Forces, because he talks a lot about his experience with the SEALs, the US Navy SEALs, and I've worked with the SEALs through the 80s and 90s, and great people, great organisation. We did a lot of work with them within the SAS. So those concepts he talks about are standard within, whether it's New Zealand SAS, Australian SAS, British SAS, US Navy SEALs, German Special Forces, GSG-9. You know, they all train together, work together, and they have the same leadership philosophies.
And I've got a theory on this. You know, I've got a theory on this, and it's not always well received, but I'm going to put it out there anyway and see what you think. And the reason that leadership is so much better in super high risk environments like the military. I use the term better in a loose term. I mean, you know, effective, inspirational, and why, you know, a lot of these methodologies, a lot of these approaches of leaders eating last and being humble and deference to expertise, why that's so much more prevalent in things like the military is because the consequences are so much higher for human life. If the consequence isn't the same, it's not as high in everyday business. It's not high at all in some businesses, really. I mean, they may have a fatality once every 10 years, one fatality, you know. If that consequence is concentrated in those environments, and therefore the leadership automatically gains that priority and that urgency because it's so important. I wonder if there's a way of, without having obviously the high risk, whether you can still instill that sense of need for great leadership without that fear of huge fatality?
Absolutely, I believe you can, but you have to have people understanding their why. Why would I do this? What would it create?
Yeah.
What is the value of it? And again, this is one of the things that is not typically well understood within the world of academia, MBAs and advanced degrees. Don't tend to teach this very effectively. Teach the leadership side of performance and why it's so important. So I understood this through my time in Special Forces. While I was after I'd gone through and completed my selection and training, and while I was in a operational squadron, I was selected to go and be staff on the selection course, evaluating other officers trying to trying to gain selection to the regiment. And I went back multiple times as staff, or was involved in multiple selection courses. And it's incredibly insightful to see people trying to come up with the goods, trying to perform. And especially when things start getting really difficult, that whole concept that I was talking about, the difference between leaders that will throw their guys under the bus versus the ones that, so when the leader comes down and wants to pat people on the back, they take a step to the right and say, go and talk to my guys, please, tell them, great, you're here. Tell them what you were going to tell me. Well, please pat them on the back, recognize them. When the boss comes down, thumping the desk, saying performance is not good enough, who's at fault? Who am I going to? I need to kick someone in the backside. To show me who did this. The leader says, "No, you tell me what the problem is. Let's talk about what you see as the problem. I'll work with my guys, because I already know that my guys are fully committed and were doing the best job that they thought was needed, the best job that they could imagine." They were committed to doing their job and doing it the best way they knew how. So if there was a gap, we need to ask ourselves what was missing in our leadership that allowed this to happen. They're already committed. They're doing the best job they know. Did we not give them the resources? Did we not give them the training? Were we not clear enough in our task brief and our evaluation of the mission and the likely success of it that allowed them to be set up in a way that this is the outcome? It's a leadership issue. And so many leaders don't get that. But so within the Special Forces world, in most cases, they're very, very good at doing that. Because they've learned that they have to. The success or otherwise pivots on the effectiveness of leaders up and down the organization.
Yeah, definitely. Brett, this is fascinating stuff. And as always with you, we could go on talking for hours and hours. I think we sat in a coffee shop once, didn't we, in Frio? And the wait staff were looking at us because we were just ordering coffee after coffee for like 2 or 3 hours. We were sat there just having a yarn. It's great stuff. But I want to try and keep these things to like 45 minutes or an hour, purely because they're going to go out on podcasts and people have got like an hour to spare, but not 3 hours, which is our usual talking span. But if it's all right with you, I'd like to get you back at some point. We can talk about some of these, some of these points in greater detail. Especially interested, as you know, because I'm doing the diploma through AIPC as well, and that whole leadership, the safety leadership element that MU developed. So especially want to talk about that in more detail as well. And I mean, there's 100 different ways we could go with the model that you've created for 4D safety, the 100 different aspects of there that we could really focus on and get into some detail with. So if it's all right with you, would you be willing to come back at a future time and talk about those other aspects?
For sure, absolutely. And
Legend.
And I think it'd be good to explore the whole area of the 4-dimensional performance coaching diploma, and how that can support people to, especially safety professionals who want to take a very solid foundation that they've developed in achieving safe operations through getting the first three dimensions right, how they can overlay that fourth dimension of people and leadership and the culture that creates, how they can do that through coaching, and how studying coaching in a way where they're not making things up, such as safety moments and non-effective pre-start meetings, all of those sorts of things. And do the things that really matter. I can talk about the research that led us to this as well. Research into leadership.
That would be awesome.
Sure,
that'd be awesome. Thank you for that. And again, I want to thank you personally. For me, I mean, you've been there, for two main points in my development within, safety here in Western Australia. As I mentioned at the beginning, you were the first guest in my book club, and now you've come on to the channel as well. So I just want to personally thank you for your support and encouragement over that time as well. It's very much appreciated. Thank you, Brett.
No, thank you. It's a pleasure, and I love to see what you're doing. You're making real inroads into these areas of just sharing that message, and that the whole area of HOP and New View, safety differently, whatever you want to call it. To me, it's just a way of understanding that safety is about people and technology and getting both working.
Getting the balance right. Yep.
Right.
Awesome. Well, we're going to say goodbye. If you could hang around just for a little bit after I close off, Brett, just so that we can catch up afterwards. Don't leave the studio. I said goodbye to someone the other day, and they thought it was time for them to leave the studio as well. And I'm sitting around going, we wanted to catch up, but I'll say goodbye to everybody else. Yeah. And we'll catch up in a bit. Okay, everybody. Well, thank you very much for watching again, or listening if you're on the podcast. If you'd like to hear more, please feel free to subscribe. Drop some comments in the message. Well, drop some messages in the comment section below to let us know any particular questions that you'd want to put forward for Brett or any of our other guests, any questions that you'd like to have explored or talked about more, any suggestions for any topics from any of the speakers as well, please feel free to drop me a message. They're more than happy to share their experience and knowledge in these areas. But once again, Brett, thank you very much, and we'll catch up soon, sir.
Thanks, David.